Okay, welcome back to Unbound Being, and today I wanted to speak about this relativity of things and the absoluteness, which is the formality of existence and the absoluteness which we try to put onto something that is relative. And this is an impossibility. And the example I've used for this several times before is that of a water. When you have a pond or a lake or a swimming pool and you stick a long stick into it, like a stick that you clean the pool with, and I'll show that, I'll demonstrate it today with a film that I made in the swimming pool of a stick going in and showing you how it bends. And you can see clearly from this that there is not an absolute, there's nothing absolute that can be put upon our existence. Our existence is a completely relative existence. Nothing can ever be found that is absolute. Everything is relative. And the demonstration of it is with light itself. So especially for flat earthers as well, it's important who call themselves that. I don't know why you want to define yourself as a flat earther again in some new box, but apparently that's what they call themselves very often. And these flat earthers are convinced that they say, well, I've seen it with my own eyes. As though your eyes are an absolutely objective, an absolute objective, right? They're subjective completely. They're not objective at all. They're an absolute relative mechanism, and therefore perception itself is relative. You cannot say that something that is perceived, even if you take the scientific model where it comes in as light and breaks through your eye, then it crosses over on the retina and the back, and then it's reversed in the brain again, and all these kinds of things. Even if you would take that model, and to me it's more the other way, it's a projection, a sense projection more than a reception, right? That's why they call it perception. But the point here is that the light is not an absolute. Perception is not an absolute. Perception is relative. Light is relative. Now, first of all, the old model of scientism or science claimed that light is an absolute, right? The speed of light, nothing is faster than the speed of light, is an absolute. First of all, if it has a speed, it's not absolute, period. You can scratch the whole light issue, which is the physical light that they try to measure in the whole spectrum, is an absolute. Scratch that off. If you can measure it, if you can see it, if you can in any way, shape, or way distance yourself from it to observe it, then there's the observer light, and light can't be the absolute, because the absolute would have to be the observer itself and not the light at all. Then, if it takes 8 minutes to travel from the sun to the earth, then it is very relative. It's a slow phenomenon. In fact, if we would look at a star that's 6 or 10 or 20 light years away, whatever happened on that star, even if it exploded, let's say that the star would be the way they say stars are, and there's a star out there, and it imploded or exploded on itself, and the star is 20 light years away, well, that means that for the next 20 years, we would still see the star where it is, because light travels so slow. So in reality, let's say, in real time, let's say, the star would have exploded or imploded, and we would still be seeing the light coming here as a normal star for 20 years before we see the actual implosion. So light is not an absolute. And the way you can also demonstrate it is with this swimming pool idea, which I'll show you in a minute, where when you take the stick and put it into the water, it bends, right? It bends. The stick is not bent. Well, to the eye it is, but to the logical deductive system, we say, well, the stick is not bent. I mean, that pole that I used to put into the pool is an aluminium pole. If it were bent, it would be, you pull it out, you couldn't bend it back, right? And anyway, when you move it up and down, the bend is right there at the meeting point of water and air. And by the way, air itself is water, but just a less dense version of water. So there is really only water and water, one more dense system of water, the water in the pool, and then the lighter version, which is the air humidity, which is about whatever, 70–80% in this case where I live. So we're still talking about not even two different mediums in a way, we're talking about two densities of the same medium. There is only water in a way, right? Even in the air, it's just less dense than in the water. So the stick goes in, and it seems to be bent. And the lower I drop my eyesight, the more bent the stick seems. So I'm not seeing the pool bottom or the stick where it is at all, according to the logic. But if I follow my senses and just say, well, what I see is what I must believe because I see it with my own eyes, like the flat earthers want to do and say, I've proven it because I've seen it with my own eyes. Well, that's taking your eyes as an absolute. Now, I'll show the video, but my point is this. In a system that is relative, in a place where everything is relative, where everything is like the senses are, sound and hearing are all coming through mediums, where you cannot find the solidity of anything. There's not any particle that you can find that is the absoluteness of that particle. Like when they try to find these particles, they go in and they find in the end that they can either find it as a particle or a wave, but if it's a wave, it's not a particle, and if it's a particle, it's not a wave, and all these kinds of scientific stuff, which is relatively real at a certain level. The point of it being, you can't pinpoint reality or an absoluteness onto a relativity. And as long as we as humans, using these various methods of deduction, these various methods like sense perceptions, these relative tools, to try to find an absolute, we're fooling ourselves. As long as we're trying to place an absolute onto something relative using the relative mechanisms as well, we both have a relativity of the eyes and perception, placed on the relativity of what is seen, and say we want to find an absolute. And so whatever science is trying to do, or religion is trying to do, or anybody is trying to do with their cognitive capacities of the mind, thinking, computing, movement, all forms of deductive reasoning, intellectual materialism, computing, thinking, philosophizing, theorizing, they're all in the world of the relative. You will only find confusion and more relativity and more diversion and more contradictions and paradoxes within that, because you're using a relativity of the mind and the eyes and the ears and cognitive capacity of sound and words and all these verbalizations and putting things into strings and sentences and books is all relative, by trying to say, but I'm trying to find the absolute. And it's got to be here somewhere, and look, this is it, boom, light is an absolute. No, it's not, because it first of all can be seen, second of all it takes time, it can be measured, and third of all, at the moment it comes to something like water, where densities of water meet each other, it breaks up and the whole thing starts to warp. So there is no absolute to be found. No flat earth, no round earth, no toroidal earth, no vortex or anything. There's nothing in this reality that is absolute. We are living inside of a relativity, meaning if you continue to strive or attempt or move or try or put effort into the relative in order for that relativity to prove any absoluteness, we fail. The only way is to return to the absoluteness, which is not inside of the relative. And that is done through the real meditation or quantum resting or being as nothing, to remain as nothing. You have to be in the absolute to find or be the absolute, right? You never find the absolute because you are the absolute. But the absolute cannot be pinned onto or within the relativity. You cannot stick a relative truth onto the absolute and say, I got it. I got it. I found it in the relativity. You cannot find absoluteness in relativity. And the water example that I've shown, that I'll be showing now, it will prove that point from a sensory level in a way, and prove as not absolute, of course, right? But it will demonstrate for us to get this idea more clear. So movement, trying, wanting, thinking, intellectual materializing, conceptualizing, theorizing, philosophizing, computing, all of these mechanisms in the relative are an impossibility to get to the absolute. They themselves define relativity. By being relative, they cannot be absolute, and therefore trying to use them to find the absolute is an absolute impossibility, will be a vicious circle of frustration and never-endingness. This is the infinite part of existence, where we can go on and on and on and on, and your life will be spent looking for absolutes within relativity and never returning back to that which is already absolute, which is the silence, the stillness, the nothingness, the void, the quantum field of resting, which is literally not nothing. I mean, you will find it not to be nothing at all. It's very rich, but it's no thing. it's no system, it's no object, it's not measured, it doesn't have weight or light or anything. So by withdrawing our attention from the relative levels back onto the absolute, which is emptiness. You close your eyes, you look into the black void of nothing. You don't think, you don't analyze, you don't speculate, you don't work things out, you don't put effort or trying. You rest as absolutely nothing. That's the only way to know the absolute, because you already are the absolute, but the relative have been overlaid on top all the time, and it's the delusion itself, the parasite itself, it's the invasion itself, it's the alien AI type of system that is trying to keep you focused on things that are relative when really you're already absolute, but the movement prevents us from realizing that. So I just wanted to make a video about the relativity of things and the absoluteness. So the relative and the absolute. And the point I had made before, and I wanted to make again, is about water and light. And it proves something. For example, if you see this stick here, this stick that's sticking in this pool is absolutely a straight stick. But looking at it from this angle, you can see it seems to be bent. And so the suggestion is by science or scientism that the light is bent by the water like a lens, and therefore the stick seems to be bent. For example, if I take this stick out, let me just grab this thing here, it's always bent right at the point where it's entering the water. And so if I leave the stick standing like this, I would suspect that the stick really is going down there and not over there, right? That's how we would look at it from a scientific point of view, using the deductive mind or the logical mind as a more important factor than our own eyes. Because if I would have to use my own eyes, I'd have to say differently. I have to say, well, this stick is bent. Obviously, it's not bent, it seems, because when I pull it out, the point on which it was bent, right now that's the point over there, but the white piece, but obviously the bent moves. So if I put this in like that, the stick is really over there, but I'm seeing it over there, right? So the stick is really over there, going straight down, and then I'm seeing it more at the tip of it, right? Which is weird, it seems. So now if we go back and I pull back over here, let me just take this one up a little bit. Now watch what happens if I'm over here. It's very clear that the stick is bent, right? So I go up here, that stick is maybe at let's say 20 degrees, and now the stick is pretty much 45 degrees, and if I go more down, it's almost, if you can still see without the reflection in the water, it's like, well, coming close to 90 as far as I can go down. It almost comes to 90, right? So then what's true? Is this stick bent? Is it less bent over here? Is it more bent over there? Right now I also have a fisheye from the side, and there's a fisheye lens on this GoPro which bends it even more, but it's pretty obvious that we're looking at something that is not absolute. And if light is broken by a simple thing as water, then it can't be absolute. How can something absolute be broken by water? That means water is more absolute or more influential than the absolute, which is obviously not the case. So water cannot be the absolute, and light cannot be the absolute either. Now we know that the humidity in the air is pretty much close sometimes to 100% in some countries, which means we're really talking about being inside of air and water anyway. Water and water. This one here is real, like water, and then the one over in here where we are in the space is, let's say, 70 or 80% humidity, and where I am at, very high level of humidity. So we're anyway in water. So if I were to believe my eyes, then I would say, well, this stick is bent. And so if I'd say my eyes are more important than than anything else, then this stick must be bent. Then when I believe my mind, I'd say no, logically speaking, that stick is not bent because it must be straight. And therefore the deductive faculty that is trying to figure out an absolute inside of a relative existence is false. We can't find an absolute within the relative. And that's what we try to do, or many people try to do. So for example, if you take flat earthers, if you're going to say that you believe your senses or any measurement devices that take measurements using the elements, let's say, of sense perception, whether that's light or sound or anything, then you're deluded, because you cannot take something that is relative and say I'm going to find an absolute within it. If something is relative, that means it always defies perception or reality. It can't be pinpointed down to a fact, because we know for a fact that if we would look into this stick, for example, and we try to find an absolute particle, I think they call it the atom or something, which is the undividable section, I think it was, may have the wrong word, but I thought that was what it meant, like where a particle is no longer dividable. We can't find that in anything, and we can never really find any solidity to any physicality either. So trying to say that the earth is flat or the earth is round, for example, is one of those non-arguments that come from this. Like flat earthers, the way they define themselves. I don't know why you want to define yourself as a flat earther or anything else, but it gives them a certain religious security again, that you are something that other people are not, and you figured something out. But look, you can't figure anything out in a relative world. If light takes 8 minutes to travel from the sun to the earth, as scientism says, I don't believe nothing they say, but let's say that they do that, and then it's not an absolute. Something that takes 8 minutes to travel is not absolute. And something that is bent by something as simple as water, right? Well, simple, I'm not derogatively speaking about water, but something like water can just, look at that, the whole thing bent. And now it's warping, because now when I move the water, the whole damn thing it's breaking reality. That's just basically destabilizing light. Look at it. The whole damn stick is moving from the water down at the breakage point all the way down. The whole damn thing is like a warping, wobbling thing. So if light is so easily broken through a lens system like water, then how the hell can that be an absolute? So we're not talking about light as an absolute. It cannot be an absolute. It's not an absolute. It takes time to travel, and it is definitely in the relative realm. And if you try to capture any of this stuff and say I want to grab 2 inches of water here, and I'll end up with nothing but just a film of water on my hand, because there is no solidity to grab in this world. There's no thing that you can pinpoint and say this is absolute, because we are not living in the absolute realm. We're living in the relative realm. So any attempt to try to completely prove something and say this is the way it is and I know it's fact and it's truth is just another illusion that we want to hold on to give ourselves a kind of security, which is really not possible. So here you can see it very clearly, you know. This is not an absolute system. This is a relative system.